am honored, guys, because I get to intro our guest speaker here today. She's going to have to wait before she comes up because I want to give a little intro to her. Pastor Helen Burns is in the house. I mean, is there a better woman on Mother's Day, but the spiritual mother of Canada? Yeah. Pastor Helen and Pastor John planted their church, how many years ago was it now, Helen? 37 years ago, and you just celebrated 49 years of marriage? Yeah, amazing. I just want to say that for women in ministry, Helen has kicked down so many doors that women like me are just walking through now. And so, Helen, we honor that you have done that for women, and I'm so happy that you're here today to preach to our house. So let's just clap for Helen, honor the word that she's going to do.
Hello, you can take your seats. Gosh, it's nice to be with you. Thank you so much. Team, you have led us so beautifully. I am a fan of acoustic worship. I think God did that just for me. I mean, I like the loud. I like it all. I mean, in my high school years, I went to a Led Zeppelin concert, so, I can do it all. I may be old, but I'm not boring. I didn't tell my mom I went. I'm a good Mennonite girl. We weren't supposed to do that. And anyhow, it is so lovely to be here. John had the privilege of coming here before me, and he came home just raving about you and this beautiful congregation. We are honored to be, in friendship and in partnership together with you in what God is doing. And we do love your pastor so much. You are in good hands. God is raising, I know, they're fantastic. I'm not going to tell all of the secrets, but, I'm very privileged. Pastor Roberta and I have had the privilege of connecting heart to heart. And you can trust someone who's open with their life, that will maybe make a phone call or ask for prayer in a hard place. Those are people you can trust. Those are people that aren't pretending we got it all together and we do everything perfectly. I think those are the kind of people you can build a future with. That's how we all need to be. And so it is a privilege. I have seen them up close and personally, love them so much, and finally get to meet their beautiful children up close and personally as well, which is pretty great. Is everybody good today? Did you call your mom? Well, you still have time. She might not want to be woken up yet, but, do that at some point. It's important to do that. Just a quick little story about my mom. About 2 weeks ago, I was in the hospital with my mom, who had been in the hospital for a month. She was in severe, severe heart failure. She's 88 and a half. Has lived a beautiful life. But I was there, she was in severe heart. The doctor called it severe. That's why I'm saying that. And her kidneys were failing. It looked, she was going to heaven, and she was totally fine with that. But we were trying to get her over, she needed a new pacemaker as well, but she was not well enough to have surgery. It seemed impossible. But finally, we were able to, the doctors and everything got her across the line to actually have this new pacemaker put in. Well, 18 hours later, my daughter Angela said, "Well, that's resurrectionoma for you." She's with us. And on Friday night, we were able to, hosted a women's event at our church, and it was a dream to have my mom there. And when I had written out the run sheet about a month or 2 or 3 months earlier for what I wanted to happen that night, in it was, this, in parentheses, an honor moment for my mom. And I felt and I wrote in there, "I really hope this happens." And so then about a week before the event, we just went through the run sheet again, and I saw that in parentheses, and the tears just flowed that God had more for her to do. And that's what I said when she woke up after surgery. I said, "Well, hello, you're still here. And so there's more work for you to do." And she said, "Yes, I guess there is," because I love my mom. She is my hero, my forever hero, and I honor her so much. So today I want to share, and it's a privilege to do so. I love the Word of God. I am so grateful that I have the privilege of standing here today, and I don't take it lightly at all that I have this honor. And I want to talk about, I thought I would pull on stories of sisterhood, that beautiful tribute to motherhood and to just the spirit of motherhood is so beautiful. I even think about God and or how Jesus said, how oft I would have gathered you. I wanted, this beautiful and nurtured you, but you wouldn't. So I think when we have people in our world, your story of the mom story may be a complicated one. It may be a very difficult story, but God is faithful. And even if we haven't been mothered well here in this world, God is faithful, and he will put mothers around you as well. And we can learn from mothers in the faith as well. So I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about two women and their relationship. They're pretty great. And I think their story is so unique. Why I love this story so much is because it's an unlikely ending. Like if you looked at the circumstances of that season and that time, it looked impossible that it would turn out the way it does. But when God's writing your story, you can stay amazed at what he is about to do. And even though the circumstances may be difficult, we sang this song, Will You Meet Me Here Again? It's in the middle that you realize I haven't been forsaken. Many of us may be today in a very messy middle. You might have started out great, and now you find yourself in the messiest of middles. And you have no idea how God's going to get you through this. And I think we need to have that but God attitude. That you don't look at your circumstances and determine what the outcome is. We are so outcome driven. So often we think if it doesn't go just like this, God must not be here. That's not true. That you have to take a look sometimes and just trust God when the middle is very messy. And your story, I have a story, you have a story. Every one of us has a story. The Bible is full of stories. And every one of them, and this is what I want to say too, and you'll see it here, that I love that God wrote stories and put them in the Bible that are pretty messy. Not all his kids behaved well. As a matter of fact, virtually nobody. There's a whole bunch that are written into the story of God. It's messy, and God didn't cover up the messy bits. He let us see that even if life is messy and not perfect, God can write a beautiful story through your life. And so your story is masterfully written. Ruth's story, we're going to talk about Ruth today, the relationship between Ruth and Naomi. I mean, the mother and the daughter and mother-in-law could be complicated. I am a mother-in-law. I've been a mother-in-law for a very long time. My oldest daughter has been married now for almost 28 years. I am so old, I can't even believe it. But I have a granddaughter who's 27. She's our oldest, and she's beautiful. And our youngest grandson is 16 and all of 6'5". And he played such a good ball game yesterday that I had to watch on Game Changer because he pitched 9 innings and there were no runs. I know, I'm a little proud. But so I have these amazing grandchildren now. So I've been a mother for a long time, but I love what God is doing. But this story here of Ruth, it shows up in the middle of big stories. It comes right after the book of Judges. So we've seen creation, we have seen Abraham, and we've seen Noah, we have Joshua. Well, there's a lot that we have experienced in the Bible, and then the Judges, a pretty heavy book. And it's right before 1st and 2nd Samuel. And right in the middle of those two big books is 4 chapters devoted to a woman named Ruth. Right there. Her name means friendship. A compassionate companion. Some of you may want to, if you're pregnant, name your baby girl Ruth because it's a beautiful name. There's only 2 books in the Bible named after women, and that would be Ruth and Esther. And the book of Ruth is the only book in the Bible, period, that carries the name of someone in the ancestry or genealogy of Jesus. This is an unlikely story. But God knows how to write the story. Not only is she a non-Jewish person, she was a worshiper from Moab, considered an outsider and an outcast. She was a widow with no children to tie a future to. And in these days, having children was really, really important. And so how could the story end the way that it did? Because God was writing in the messy middle a beautiful story with a God outcome. And so Ruth's life is a reminder that it's never about what's happened to you. Some of us have some pretty hard stories. And maybe you might have, and it may be what's happened to you or something that you've chosen to do in your past that you feel marks you and disqualifies you. And I want to tell you, with God, there's always hope and there's always a future. There's always, I love this quote by Soren Kierkegaard. He said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. Isn't that good? I've said that so often. Once I first read that quote, several years ago, I think of it so often. Life is understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. So we have to keep going in forward motion. Some of us have had dreams that have been crushed, and we feel like God isn't with us or for us, but that's not true. Ruth's beautiful character is revealed in her story. Her life opened up pathways for God's grace and God's blessing, not just for herself, but for those who were coming after her. I always think about there are multitudes and multitudes, and you may not be aware of it. I pray you are. Multitudes and multitudes on the other side of your choices and your obedience to follow God. I think about John and I. I was raised in a beautiful home, and I won't go into all of the details, but enough to say that I got married at a young age, married my high school sweetheart. Yes, we are married now for 49 years, and I only liked 45 of them. I know it's a beautiful story. It was a hard start. We were madly in love, and I'm like, this is not what I thought marriage would look like. And on the outside, our life looked beautiful, but it was broken. And so I was trying to keep up, a good front. I had been raised in church, was a passionate follower of Jesus. I was a radical in high school for Jesus. As a matter of fact, I took a look at that cute boy, Johnny Burns, in grade 12. And I said, boy, that Johnny Burns is cute. And so he still is. Still makes my heart pitter-patter. And he's pretty great. But I did not know, and being a good Mennonite girl, if any of you are of those roots, I was supposed to marry someone with a last name that was one of the familiar ones, my ancestry is Balzer Taves, so, and my grandmother was a Hebert. We have them all, like we are like Mennonite to the core. And I wasn't supposed to date an English boy, but I did because he was so cute. I fell in love with him. And we got married and thought, this is going to be the dream. And after 4 years of marriage, we were living in 2 different cities. He was a brand new dentist and had we built a big home and a dental practice, but my heart was broken. Not because of infidelity or any abuse, but we had grown so far apart. And it was in the most broken days of my life that I had a re-encounter with Jesus and gave my life. I bowed my knee. I thought, God, I have had life with you and I've had life without you, and I will not live one more day without you. I did not know if John would take one step forward with me into the future with Jesus, but I was going with Jesus, whatever that looked like. And obviously God dealt with both of our hearts deeply and rewrote a very broken story. And God will use what was our greatest failure and use it for his glory. Because today, primarily, not only pastoring a church, but we teach much on marriage and family and healthy relationships. That is our passion so much. So you don't know what God is going to build out of your most broken places. And so here, Ruth's character, her faith is revealed in the story. Her life opened up pathways, not just for herself, but for others. But I think maybe one of the key points that I would just want to bring you back to it, I would encourage you to read the whole story. It's just 4 chapters, and I don't have time to go through it all. But hers is a story of making good choices. Deuteronomy, I didn't put this in the scriptures, but Deuteronomy 30, verse 19 says that God has set before us this day life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life. There is a miracle that can happen in a single step when you choose life. So Ruth and Naomi are the main characters, and they stand out as faithful women. Backstory, just a really quick, and I'm going to just read it from here. Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, had left their homeland where they were because they were starving there. There was a famine in the land, and they went to Moab, which was like a despised place for them. But when you're hungry, you go where you need to go to find bread. And while they were there, their two sons married Moabite women. These two women were Ruth and Orpah. Fun fact, Oprah was supposed to be named Orpah, but someone misspelled her name on her birth certificate, and she became Oprah. So at least that's the story. I don't know if I read it somewhere, and now I'm just telling you that. I think it's true, because Oprah said it was. So Elimelech dies, Mahlon and Chilion die, and so now all that is left is Naomi with her two daughter-in-laws, these Moabite women. One is named Ruth and one is named Orpah. And so Naomi says, go back to your people. I'm going to go. She heard that there was food again in her homeland, and she was going to go back to Bethlehem. And so when she sees him, she says, I'm going back. I have nothing for you here, nothing at all. And so they both say, no, we're not going to go. And then finally, Orpah decides, I am going to go back to my people, which made perfect sense to go back to your home. Here you were, destitute. You have nothing left, so you go back to mom and dad. But Ruth said something different. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 through 19, Ruth said, don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. Where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die. And that's where I'll be buried. So help me God. Not even death is going to come between us. This was a serious commitment to follow her mother-in-law. And when Naomi saw that Ruth had set her heart on going with her, she gave in. And so they head out. And this is all new to Ruth, but she had seen something in her mother-in-law that she wanted. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. She clung to Naomi and made a declaration. I'm going to follow you because you're following God. She had seen something in her life. And that's what I mean about when you walk with God, you open up pathways and opportunities. People see your life. And they want what you have. They see something. And so you draw them to Jesus. You draw them to God by your very life example. So Ruth's life is integral to God's really big story, God's really big plan. But here's the deal. So is yours. Your life is no less important than the life of Ruth or any of the apostles. Our life matters, and how we live it truly, truly matters. So I think we should stop being casual about who we are and just be flippant about it. Or think, I've made too many mistakes, or I'm not important. You know, God wanted to use Moses, and Moses says, well, I can't speak. That didn't matter because God chose him and set him out. We may have may have reasons, but no excuse. So I want to call you to walk in the purpose and the plan of God because your life truly matters. Ruth's story is one of radical love and devotion. And we see this. So God was choosing daughters. We saw this just in this beautiful story again around women that we heard earlier that Pastor Roberta read. God uses women and men in his story. He doesn't have a preference of men over women or women over men. He wants us all to step up and to be involved and included in the big story. He invites us, and I see that all the time. It's an invitation. Life is an invitation. Salvation is an invitation. Blessing is an invitation. It's always an invitation, but you have the opportunity to choose yes or no. You choose. No one can choose. There's some things other people can choose for you. But these are the kind of invitations and choices nobody can make for you. And so Psalm 27, one of my favorite verses says, here's what I've learned through it all. Don't give up. Don't be impatient. Be entwined as one with the Lord. Be brave and courageous and never lose hope. Yes, keep waiting because he won't disappoint you. Where are you attaching your faith and your hope? Is it to God? Is it to people? Is it the government? Because the only place that you can actually know you will never be disappointed is if you attach your dreams to God. He is the one responsible and will carry it out. And this beautiful story ends amazing. And again, I encourage you to read it. But I think often it's told like the steamy romance novel. Here is poor Ruth, and they need food. And so they go out, and there's a field, and we're going to look at this a little bit. But this story of the outcome of it isn't some Harlequin romance. It's a God story of connecting two lives. And I want to say this, I believe this with my whole heart. Your destiny, you cannot fulfill it alone. Church is God's idea because we need one another to get to where he's called us to be. I would never be who I am without the influence and the leadership of people in my life that I have trusted to speak into my life. I have seen their lives. Some of them I have followed from afar, but their example and their leadership has taught me to go forward in life. You will never arrive at destiny on your own. You will be accountable on your own, but you need people to get there. That's why God says, I will build my church and the gates of hell. So church is God's idea. It's not man's idea. It's God's idea. And so, it's interesting. I talk about, like the steamy romance novel. And I want to bring this point up. I think often we think, gorgeous Ruth, she must have just been a stunner. She may have been. Probably was, but the Bible says nothing about that. Just so you know. The Bible doesn't say she was a beauty. It does say she was a foreigner from a despised nation. How's that for your, I don't know what they're called, but I was thinking about, when you meet people online, this is who you are, what profile, right, whatever. Ruth, a despised nation is where I come from. I am a widow and I have been barren after 10 years of marriage. That in that context, in that time, was not a gift. It was looked down on if you were barren. Like, what sin are you committing if you're barren? There's no shame in that. God knows your destiny and God knows your future. So sometimes when we look at this, like, oh, isn't this beautiful? And, the angel choirs are singing and Cupid bows are flying. It wasn't like that. But we see someone who trusted God, gave her heart to the God that she saw lived out in the life of her mother-in-law and said, I want to follow you because your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. 4 little thoughts about this amazing woman. First of all, she was brave and determined, very determined. How determined are you? What does it take for you to get off the plan? So often our setbacks, it's like, oh, I can't do it. You got to have some fight in you. You've got to rise up and have a determination to follow God. Again, in Ruth, she said, don't urge me to leave you. Where you go, I'll go. And she says, may the Lord deal with me ever so severely, even if even death separates you and me. She had a choice. She could easily have gone back to her people, and no one would have thought anything else of it, but she was brave. She was a risk taker, and that's what caused her to be an agent of change. This was not an emotional response when she says, nothing but death will separate me from you. We need to make brave decisions. What's the last brave decision you made? I want to encourage you, follow God and watch where he'll take you. And he's going to require of you to make some brave decisions. For some of you today, it may be saying, I'm going to trust God with my future and give my life to Jesus. It's the best decision you'll ever make, but it's a choice to trust in God. Choices are powerful, but they're also precarious. Every choice you make takes you somewhere. Where are the choices you've made taking you? And maybe some of them we need to turn it around and say, God, like I did that night with my broken heart and broken dreams. There was a night many years ago when I thought my marriage was over. I tucked 2 little girls into bed, Angela and Danica, my first 2 girls. They were 3 and 2 years old. I was very, very pregnant with my 3rd daughter. I had just tucked them into bed. I remember looking at my big pregnant stomach and thought, what have I done? How did I get here? It was choices. I hadn't opened my Bible in 4 years. I had not prayed other than desperate prayers for 4 years. I hadn't been in church for 4 years. And I would have thought, never could I be that girl. Because high school, somebody said, there's a girl in grade 10 who likes you, John, but if you ever mention God to her, she'll talk your ear off, so don't do that. Because I was a passionate Jesus follower, which was what attracted John to me. But now we found ourselves, like 7 years after that first date, heartbroken. But I had to make a choice. And I got on my knees that night by my bed, and I said, God, I have had life with you, and I've had life without you, and I'm not going to live one more day without you. And I've never gone back on that choice. I didn't know, like I said, if John would follow me. But God did a sovereign work as he changed my life, which became an invitation to John to change his life. Because I don't think I was doing a very good example before of living as a Christian. I was pretty angry Helen through a lot of that. But when God took over, everything began to change. And he kept thinking, who is this woman? She's nice. She hasn't been nice for years. But that's what Jesus did. It wasn't me. It was letting God rule my life that changed everything. So one choice can be a hinge moment to so much more. My hinge moment was in 1978 when I got on my knees and said, that's it. From now on, I'm following you. So don't just live for this moment, live for the future. Make brave decisions. Take one step, because there's a miracle in a single step. And that was my single step moment, and I've made many more since, but I will never regret. Just like I said, it's a hinge moment. It opened a door, and the world changed forever. Secondly, we see that Ruth was full of faith and expectation. Here's a really great quote from John Maxwell. He said, where there is no hope in the future, there is no power in the present. Where there is no hope in the future, there is no power in the present. And if you find yourself, your prayers or your life feels powerless, let me ask you, what are you dreaming of? What are you hoping for? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You got to have a hope. But you attach your dreams and your hope to God, not to people. I used to hope that John would change, and he would have been the agent of change and what would change our life. John was incapable of changing my life. It had to be God. But I thought, if John would do this, or if this would happen, then I will. No, I had to lose that and attach all of my hope and all of my outcomes into God. And if your hope is in anything other than God, you will always be disappointed. Always, guaranteed. And so if you find yourself constantly butting up against something and disappointment after disappointment, I don't know what your story is, but maybe you've been hoping in people who have disappointed you instead of God, right? Ruth chapter 2 is the story of hope and faith and expectation. She says, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, and I love that she's still called the Moabite, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. That's a sentence filled with hope. We're hungry. Naomi and Ruth were hungry. She said, I'm going to go to the fields. And there was a practice in the land where they would leave margin, they would leave some leftover grain. And she thought, I'm going to go. And I'm just going to pick up the leftover grain, and I'll bring it back, and we can eat. But she expected to find favor. Can I ask you, what do you expect? Do you expect to find favor? Do you believe when you walk in a room, hello, the world loves me? I think you should. I mean, not everyone will, but I think you should have that expectation. And I live like that. I think it shocks people sometimes, like, oh, you're kind of confident. I'm not confident in me because I am so great, but I know who's in me is, and that's Jesus. And so when you walk into a space, realize who's walking with you. Expect to find favor in your life. She expected to find someone who would treat her with kindness. And so do you have negativity, or are you positive with expectation? Actually, Naomi at this point is going, don't call me blessed, call me bitter, call me Mara, which means, life has been hard. And here the one who was following God, she now lost her joy, but sweet Ruth is like, I'm going. And, God turned that story around. But don't speak with negativity. Point 3. Ruth was industrious. She was a hard worker. She went to work. Idle hands will not get you where you want to go. If you have a dream and a promise, you have to attach a whole lot of elbow grease to it. There is something about working hard, but when you're working with God, that work is miraculous. We're invited into this journey with God. And so, but we roll up our sleeves. We don't just think, oh, it's God's plan. I'm just going to open my mouth and just expect food to drop in it. I'm just going to go and use my debit card and just think, even though I haven't worked, I'm going to have thousands of dollars there that I can just, draw on. No, you have it because you worked for it. There is work attached to expectation. If you have a dream, as a matter of fact, the scripture, I can't remember, I think it's Ecclesiastes, it says, for a dream comes with much painful effort. And it's true, there's a lot of effort that has to be invested. But she goes out there, enters a field, it says in Ruth chapter 2, verse 3. She goes out, enters a field, begins to glean behind the harvesters. And as it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was about to become her husband, who is from the clan of Elimelech. God's providence is always at work in your life, just so you know. Not just for Ruth, but for you and for myself as well. So now we see her good reputation precedes her. So Boaz takes notice of her. Ruth chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 say, Boaz answered her, I've heard all about you. I heard the way you treated your mother-in-law. You'll get points if you treat her well. After the death of her husband and how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God rewards you well for what you've done. And with a generous bonus besides from God, to whom you've come seeking protection under his wings. She didn't go looking for a husband. She was following God. And in her pursuit of God, she found provision and God's plan. I love it. It says God rewards you. And besides from God, to whom you've come seeking protection under whose wings? God's wings. And that's our goal and our pursuit is to go to work and then find the blessing of God. And the last thing I want to just say is that point number 4, Ruth's heart was filled with gratitude. She carried the language of thankfulness, the language of just, it's amazing how gratitude attracts the attention of God. I think it opens doors. As a matter of fact, kindness opens a door. Not just saying what we want to say or do what we want to do, but actually think, how are my actions and my character an expression of the God that I serve? And Ruth chapter 2, verse 13 says, oh, sir, such grace, such kindness, I don't deserve it. You've touched my heart, treated me like one of your own, and I don't even belong here. This opened up and attracted not only the attention of Boaz, but also the attention of heaven. It's a beautiful story. Here she is in the field and gets the attention of the landowner, who happens to be a relative of Naomi's. And that story is he's called a kinsman redeemer. Steps in and wants to marry her, which would create such extraordinary provision. Again, remember, she was a widow, she was a foreigner, and yet she had clung to God and got the attention and the favor. God can write into the story just the way he wants to. We can't dictate how that story will be written. But when we follow God, something beautiful happens. And the story is that they get married. And beautiful Naomi, her life is cared for. Ruth, her life is cared for. They have children. After all this time of being barren, they have children. And that child is in the lineage of Jesus. So God writes this story. Like I said, I love this book of Ruth so much. I love the relationship between these two women, ones who sought after God and went for it. And so I wonder, maybe your story feels a little bit messy right now. And maybe it feels like, God, are you with me? He is. He won't leave you. One of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. It says here, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. I think this beautiful scripture can be a soft pillow for your heart. God is working all things together. Maybe it's not the way you thought the story should have been written. My life is filled with people who have and even some situations in my life, they don't seem fair. They don't seem right. Like, why did that happen? You can't control people, but you can trust God. People will hurt you. People will disappoint you because they're people, and some more than others. I've been devastated by some people. But if I had let that become my focus, I don't think I'll be doing what I'm doing today. I just leave it with God. Is there work to that? Yeah. Some of the hardest work I've ever done has not been physical labor. It's heart work. My favorite scripture, and the one I cling to, is found in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, pay attention to your heart because it'll affect everything you do. In some translations, it says it will determine the course of your life. And so when your heart's healthy, your way will be healthy. When your heart's hurting and broken, and life breaks our hearts sometimes. And I can imagine Naomi and Ruth experienced that. But the beauty of the story is that they put their future in God's hands. And when your future is entrusted to God, you can expect a glorious outcome. Maybe not the script you might have written, but God's faithfulness will meet you because all things, not some things, all things will work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Amen. I pray you're encouraged by the story. I always am. I love this story because it's about the faithfulness of God and how he positions you and how he attaches your life to people in ways that you may not have seen. I look at my life today and I think, God, how did I get to know these people? How did you intertwine our lives? I could not have. I've had the privilege of traveling the world. And on most continents, I have these God connections that I'm like, how did I get to know them? God wrote a story. I'm so grateful for it. I'm grateful for my heritage. I'm grateful for my parents. And I'm grateful for a God in heaven who has had his eye on me every second of every day and has always led me with kindness and with goodness. So surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life.